Hi, this is Sandy from Spitfire's Customer Experience team, and in this video we're going to take a look at Symphonic Organ. When we first look in the Instruments folder for Symphonic Organ, we'll see two main instruments, symphonicOrgan.nki and Warp's symphonicOrgan.nki. The first of these is the standard organ instrument, and the second is warped material made using the recordings of the organ, which are loaded into our eDNA interface. There's a multi-part series video on the eDNA interface which you can find on our website. So for this video, I'm going to focus on symphonicOrgan.nki, which is the main instrument. You can double-click it or click and drag it to load. When you first open Symphonic Organ, you'll be presented with the general overview. Looking first at the bottom of the window, we can see the keyboard displaying our playable range and our key switches. The blue keys represent the playable range of the instrument, and the red keys represent the key switches for changing between the different articulations. We'll come back to those in a moment. Looking at the interface itself, along the top we have the standard Kontakt header. This is where we can change our settings for things like audio and MIDI, our maximum number of voices that we'll use, as well as purging and loading our samples, and saving and loading snapshots. We can also solo and mute this instrument, as well as tune and pan and adjust the overall volume. This is quite standard for almost all of our libraries. Looking underneath this, the interface can be divided into four main sections. We have the sidebar on the left, which has the name of the instrument, as well as the name of the currently selected articulation. Along the bottom to the right, we have our articulations themselves, which you can click on to select different articulations, and you'll see these names represented in the left-hand side. You can also select different articulations by clicking or playing the key switches in the red range of the keyboard. These are arranged chromatically from left to right. If you want to select multiple articulations at a time, simply shift-click or play multiple notes on your keyboard. Above the articulations, we have our Easy Mix. This allows us to adjust how close or far the instrument sounds in the room. Clicking and dragging all the way to the top will load up the closest mics. And of course, clicking and dragging all the way to the bottom will set the mics as far away as possible. I'll leave that set around the middle. You'll notice as I move this fader that the memory display up here changes to represent the mics being loaded and unloaded from memory. So this isn't a control to be played in real time. To the right of our Easy Mix, we have our four general controls. In this case, instead of dynamics, which you might see in many of our libraries, we have the swell control. This will adjust the overall volume, but only for a certain set of articulations. Not all articulations have a swell control, just like a real organ. Those articulations that are affected are number 1, ethereal swell, number 5, horror strings, number 9, non-interstellar flutes, number 13, full organ, and number 14, full congregation. To the right of our swell control, we have our release. This adjusts how long it takes the note to release after you lift the key. Setting it all the way to the left will be a very short release, and setting it all the way to the right will be a longer release. I'll leave it in the middle for now. Our tightness control adjusts the beginning of the note. Dragging it all the way to the right will cut into the start of the note slightly to give a slightly tighter timing, and dragging all the way to the left will start at the very beginning of the recorded sound, which might sound slightly sloppier in timing, but slightly more realistic in timbre. Unless you're having issues with timing or timbre, I'd leave this well alone in the middle. Finally, on the right here, we have an expression control. This is just a volume control, which will adjust the volume within the instrument. For any of these controls, you can right-click or control-click on Windows to learn and check the MIDI CC automation. For instance, swell is on CC1, which is our mod wheel. Looking in the sidebar, we have a second page available to us, which we can access by clicking on this white wrench. Clicking this will take us to the advanced view. This is quite similar to the general overview. We have some slightly more fine control over the different settings. For instance, instead of our Easy Mix controls, we now have our 6 different mic positions, each with individual controls. From left to right, these are IN for inside mics, recordings inside the organ itself, CV, which is a close valve mic, CR, which is a close ribbon mic, LR, which is actually LCR, which is left, center and right omnidirectional mics, ST, which is a standard stereo pair, and A, which is our ambient mics. From left to right, these go from closest to most distant sounding. Dragging a fader up from 0 will load it into memory, and you'll see this reflected on the overall memory load for the patch. Dragging it all the way to 0 will do the opposite and unload it from memory. If you'd like to unload a mic without moving the control, you can also click on this small microchip icon to load and unload it from memory. You'll see that same microchip icon under the articulations, and it has the same function there. You can remove them or add them to memory. Clicking on the mic letter for instance A for ambient, allows us to choose the output that this is routed to. This can be useful if you're working in 5.1 and you want to send your more ambient mics to the surrounds. At the top of our mic mix, we also have a few more general controls. The first of which on the left here has no effect, as this is a velocity control, so this can be ignored. Next to that, we have our stereo controls, where we can select the individual mics and adjust their stereo width and their pan position. Next to the stereo controls, we have a toggle for per articulation mixing. When this is grey, as it is now, these settings that we make to the mics and the pan position and so on are global to all articulations. Whereas if I click this toggle and enable it, any changes that I make to the mix are now only made to the currently selected articulation. So I'm on articulation 14 right now, full congregation, and I've made these settings. If I change to number 1, ethereal swell, you'll notice that the mic positions change entirely. If I uncheck that box, these settings will be on all of the articulations. The final control at the top here, the floppy disk icon, is what you would expect. It allows you to save and load different mic presets, as well as resetting your mix settings. To the right of our mic controls, we have some options for memory management. This drop-down menu allows us to select some different presets for memory. For instance, power will load absolutely everything to memory, all of the mics and all of the articulations, and it won't purge any unused articulations. You'll notice that this now takes up nearly 4 GB of memory, so if you're working on a laptop or have very limited memory, this might not be the right preset for you. In that case, you might want to select laptop, for instance, and you'll see that it's now less than 1 GB. Under that, we have the option to purge unused, which is checked currently. This means that any signals that we're not currently using will be purged from memory. Unchecking this will load absolutely everything to memory, much like the power preset. And again, you'll notice the memory load increases quite considerably. Let's leave that checked for now. Under that, we have the option to transpose. Checking this box and clicking and dragging up and down on the number will transpose the playable range by semitones. We also have an option for CC mapped velocity. Again, this doesn't have any effect in this particular library, so it's worth just leaving this alone. To the right of our options, we also have a drop-down menu with some extra options for layering round robins from neighbouring zones. For instance, we can layer from the layer below or the layer above by choosing these options at the bottom. Or we can also add extra round robins by using the round robins from neighbouring zones. To the right of this, we have those same 4 controllers that were available on the general overview. These behave exactly as they did on the first page, and again, we can right-click them to learn new automation or remove the existing automation. This is also just a handy way to check what is currently assigned to a fader. As I said before, you can unload and load any articulations by clicking on the microchip underneath, but we also have some other options here. If you command-click or control-click on Windows, you can choose to trigger articulations by different settings, such as by custom key switches, velocity range, so that playing harder will trigger that articulation, or playing softer, and so on. You can also choose to play different articulations depending on the incoming MIDI channel, in which case you'll need to change your MIDI channel to Omni in the header, or by speed of playing if you'd like. I'll leave these untouched. For an instrument such as the organ like this, the key switches are fine. In the expert view, finally, at the bottom here, we have some other options in the bottom of the sidebar. First, this cog on the lower left allows us to tweak the last played note. We can choose to skip this round robin, adjust its tuning or volume, or adjust the release of that sample. And we can also remove any tweaks that we might have made if we're not happy with them. Next to that, we have what's called the keyboard shimmier. This allows us to move our default key switches, so by clicking and dragging on this left to right, you can see that that red range of keys transposes. This can be useful if you're using a smaller keyboard and the lowest octave is out of your playable range. I'll skip over the CC option for a moment and I'll come back to that last, because it corresponds to something that we can find in the padlock menu here. Clicking on the padlock, we can see some different options for switching articulations. Until now, we've just been clicking them or playing with the default key switches to change the selected articulation. But we can also use completely unlocked articulations. We can lock our articulations so that they don't respond to any changes. This can be useful if you've got a particular articulation or set of articulations selected and you don't want them to change. We can also lock to our key switches if we've made any custom key switches. Or we can use locked to UACC, UACC key switch, or program change. These are slightly more advanced options which you can find described on our knowledge base. Essentially though, UACC will allow us to change articulations using a dedicated MIDI control change message, or a MIDI CC. in this case MIDI CC32. And that brings us to our final control here in the lower left, which is to change the assignment for that MIDI CC. Like I say, the default is CC32, but you can change it to any MIDI CC that you like. That's it for our overview of the Symphonic Organ interface, but before I go, let's take a quick look at what else you can find in the library. First off, loading up the Symphonic Organ, we'll be presented with our eDNA interface. Again, this is covered at length in a multi-part video on the eDNA interface, so I'd recommend watching that to learn about all the different sections of the interface. But one thing that's new in this library is that we use Kontakt snapshots. Underneath the name of the currently loaded instrument, we'll find another drop-down where we can select some presets that we've made. I'd recommend exploring some of these user presets and then tweaking and saving your own by clicking on this floppy disk icon to the right. Underneath the two instruments that you'll find in the Instruments folder, you can also see that there's an Advanced folder. This allows us to load up just the manuals, just the pedals, just the ensembles, building blocks, or some quite peculiar effects. Digging even deeper, we can find the individual articulations for the manuals, pedals, or the full ensembles. Again, you can double-click to enter a folder, and double-click back up at the arrow at the top here to go up a level. That's it for our overview of the Spitfire Symphonic Organ. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at spitfireaudio.com/support. Thank you.